WADA makes me sound very important, but really I'm not. I'm just an ordinary, average citizen. So, fear. We know that it's one of a very powerful emotion. It's the one thing that stops us from doing the things that we need to do, or taking chances. Fear is that little voice inside our head that makes us second-guess our moves, our decisions, and also it stops progress, it stops development, and we stop taking chances. We know that it's often used as a tool for some to control people, to control women, young girls, marginalized communities. And that's going on in our country today, in our society, especially for women and young girls. We live in a society that wants us to be afraid of things. I'm sure you all have heard these being said to you at one point in time. You know, we come across conversations where people will say, don't wear makeup, you know, don't wear your hair too long, don't wear tight clothing, don't wear short skirts because sluts do that. Don't walk alone at night. Don't go out to parties. Because if something bad happens to you, you ask for it. So the whole idea is that people, society, some of the men and some of the women do not want us to be ourselves. They don't want us to be comfortable with healthy human relations. So my point is that fear, it's not real. It's all up here. And what we need to do is we need to break away from that mentality. You see, folks, it's the 21st century right now. And if you think about it, you know, civilization, we've come a very long way. We've achieved so many wonderful things. But seeing how some of the women and young girls are being treated in this day and age, it makes us wonder, like, are we regressing as a society? More so, are we regressing as a nation? So the question is, if yes, what can we do about it? Now, allow me to digress a little bit. Let me talk about Malaysia, this awesome federation that we live in. It was created in 1963 by forefathers and foremothers who had a vision. They had a vision to simply make this federation great. Trump aside, the whole idea is that our forefathers and our foremothers wanted things. They wanted to ensure that this federation was kept free. Most importantly, fair. And something that, well, rather a society that would adhere to democratic principles. Now, we have the Federal Constitution of Malaysia that enshrines all these wonderful things for each and every citizen of Malaysia. One that respects personal liberties, respects freedom to express, and more so to choose and decide what we want. Of course, it has to be in the realm of, you know, moral things. But ultimately, it supports the idea that we can be ourselves. But you know what? Fast forward it to 2016. Again, do we see these things happening? As a matter of fact, you know, if you think about it, you read all of the horrible things in the news and social media, and even seeing how human beings treat other human beings. Now again, if you think about it, or rather I think about it, Malaysians have every right to feel upset and angry, and more so women, and more so young girls in our society. You see, it's challenging, and we live in challenging times. But that difficulty increases when you're a woman. And it increases again if you're from a minority group or marginalized community. And if you throw in religion into that mix, you can pretty much kiss whatever freedom and liberties you have goodbye. Now, I apologize in advance if my approach comes off a little bit aggressive or a little bit too abrasive, but fact is, there are some things that we can no longer sugarcoat. Now, being a woman in politics, we know that politics is often regarded as a boys' club. I've personally felt the experiences, that's not really too wholesome, stuff that could demoralize a person. But the fact is, if you do not stand up, and if you do not tell them that that is wrong, things will never change. Because the problem is misogyny. It's hard to spell, but very easy to practice. And this happens when people will berate you, and they will ridicule you, and they will try to put you in your place by coming up with all these fallacies and lies about women having domesticated genes, and telling us that, no, you're supposed to go to the kitchen and cook and do whatever, which isn't bad, but the idea is that we need to come together and share the responsibilities. Now, the fact is, women, young girls, we often pay the price for the decisions made by men. That's misogyny, that's patriarchy right there. So I'm going to show you a few examples of how all of that comes into play in our society and also in global terms. When we talk about child marriages, unfortunately, in Malaysia, there's not enough data and information surrounding it. In early 2013, there was a case where a 40-year-old man raped a 13-year-old child. Now, to escape conviction, he married her, took her as his second wife. That is disgusting, and that should not be allowed to happen in Malaysia or even anywhere in the world. You see, child marriage, it's just wrong because it has so many problems. It gives out so many problems. First of all, it denies children the ability to develop maturely into functioning adults. It denies them of an education. And more so, when you think about it, when children give birth to children, there's always a higher mortality rate for the mothers as well as the infants. Simply because, their bodies are not meant for that yet. They're not developed yet. And the lack of sex education, the lack of knowledge, brings about a whole other realm of incidences, negative things such as sexually transmitted diseases, and of course, domestic violence. Now, if this trend continues, we will see 145 million children being married off in about, say, 4 years. There's also gender-based violence, rape, sexual assault, harassment, stalking, prostitution, sex trafficking. Now, the whole idea of gender violence is to really dominate another person through violent means, simply just to maintain an equal structure. Now, we know that rape, for an example, it's one of the most underreported crimes in the world, with 3,000 rape cases reported every year on average, and only 2 out of 10 cases going to court. Now think about it. A woman is being raped every 35 minutes in Malaysia. So from the start of Deborah's presentation to the end of mine, a woman somewhere in Malaysia will be raped. Now I can't live with that. And I feel that it's really our responsibility to stand up and do something about it. You see, the problem is we live in a society that teaches us not to be raped, rather than telling the men that it's not okay to rape. So what we need to do is we need to change that narrative. Fact is, rape is never a victim's fault, but our society will want you to believe that it's always a woman's fault. Now, when we talk about violence, domestic violence, violence is still violence. And as you can see, there's nothing domestic about domestic violence. Now, all of this idea comes in simply because of how society thinks. You know, society thinks whatever happens between a man and a woman behind closed doors, it's a private matter. But really, when it affects society, when it affects how we treat one another, it becomes a public issue. And last of all, I'm going to speak a little bit about female genital mutilation, or FGM as we call it. Obviously, there's nothing right about it. There's no health benefits about FGM. Clearly, it's a violation of human rights. Now, what it is that the United Nations has recognized 4 different types of FGMs. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, and all of which varies from the severity. It's a difference between a snip to a slash and complete sew. Again, there's no health benefits, but that is an example of how misogyny and how patriarchal beliefs are being misused to silence women, to create fear amongst young girls. So what we need to do is we need to address such issues. We need to pinpoint and find out what encourages such vile, repulsive behaviors in some of the people in our society. So I'll talk a bit about politics. Now, women in politics in Malaysia, currently we have 222 members of parliament, but only 24 women. Now, in the Dewan Negara, we have 64 senators, but only 12 women. Now, in the federal government, we have 71 positions encompassing of both ministers and deputies, but only 9 women. And let's look at the Prime Minister's office. 37 ministers plus the Prime Minister plus the Deputy Prime Minister, that's 39. But we only have 3 women. Nancy Shukri, Azalina Osman, and Rohani Abdul Karim. Really? Does that seem fair to you? Now, if we talk about state governments, we have roughly 10 positions, but never more than 2 women excos at one term. Although during the previous Khalid Ibrahim's term, we had 4 excos, but again, surely we can do better. Now, on a global scale, the figures are a little bit better. Women in parliament have nearly doubled in the past 20 years. It's good, but still, it's only 22%. That's still very low. We have not yet achieved the 30%, or rather the minimum 30% needed for society to start seeing tangible and significant changes in our society. So any shift towards creating a more sustainable society, we really need to include gender equality. Now, gender equality, that's not just a women's issue. I've had a lot of reactions, whenever I talk about gender equality, people just fluff it off and say, yeah, it's a women's issue. Of course you'll talk about it. No, it's a fundamental human right. And the way I see it, it's a necessity. It's a necessary foundation for us to ensure peace, stability, and security. And these are things that we need to make sure that our country and our world will start seeing, positive changes. So in it, we have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. I know, it's a mouthful to pronounce, but we call it CEDAW. So what it is, it's an international treaty that came about in 1979 and was recognized by the United Nations, I think in 1981. What it is, it's just simply an international Bill of Rights for women. And it's great. In it, it has so many articles. And what it is that it forms as a blueprint, a guideline for all governments, for all nations to follow. It demands women's participation in decision-making levels, rejection of violence and discrimination of all forms, equality for all. And we're talking about access to healthcare, education, decent work, representation, protection for women, girls, men, boys, and also the third gender of which our country has not yet recognized. All in all, it's there to serve a purpose, which is to remind the governments, to remind the nations that when you form policies, when you talk about how, certain bills should be proposed and amended and whatnot, always consider our experiences, our thoughts, and our perspectives in every social dimension that exists. Now, politics. I know some people think it's dirty, but you know what? It's something that is so important because it happens and it's a part of us. For us, for women, for young girls and men and Malaysians in general, politics is something that some of us might be a bit ashamed about with all the ongoings of the world. But fact is, the toxicity of sexism in our society, and more so in our nation, in our government structure, exists. It's real. And it has, unfortunately for us, become a permanent fixture. But it's something that's not impossible to change. We can do this. Now, what we need to do is we need to band together. We need to create more noise to drown out the naysayers and the hate mongers and the fear mongers. When there's more of us, men and women included, then we can start seeing some changes. Fact is, women will never be equal outside the home until men are equal in it. So it's a shared responsibility. Now, when we see the changes that we want, when we think that something is wrong and you feel that you need to say something about it, say it. If you feel that something is not right and that things can be better, my goodness, do it. To change the current landscape of things in the world, in the country, in our society, in school and whatnot, it's all a question of ownership. And that's one of the reasons why I took a dive into politics. It's a commitment that I've made for this country, for this generation, for this federation. So, I'm going to end this with just a simple note. What we need to do is we need to raise awareness. More so, we need to educate the people surrounding us in our society, men, women, and whatnot. And we need to continue celebrating strong women, their strength, achievements, and courage. So folks, here's to all the strong women out there. May we get to know them. May we raise them. And my goodness, may we be them. Thank you.